Hey guys, Luke here and welcome back. In my last video, I mentioned I'd be starting a series on the Raspberry Pi. Well, here we are. This is going to be the first video in a series of at least 3, maybe 4 to start, and I'll definitely add more as time goes on. Now, as with any series, we need a starting point. So this video is going to be dedicated to setting up the Raspberry Pi for the first time. Maybe you just got it for Christmas, or maybe it's been sitting in your desk for months. Now's your chance to see what it can do. So let's dive right in. So there are 2 main ways you can set your Raspberry Pi up. Option 1, just like a typical computer, like you see here. In this setup, we have our monitor, we have a keyboard, we have a mouse, we have the Raspberry Pi board, an HDMI cable, and the power cable. And the second option is called Headless Mode, which looks like this. Essentially, you have any computer that's connected to the network that you remote to your Raspberry Pi device through, which makes it super convenient because you can put this anywhere in your house. Oh, hey there. Who's a good boy? Both setups are completely fine for this series, but I'm going to show you how to implement option 1, just like a typical computer, because that's more beginner friendly. However, at the end, I will note the differences for getting into headless mode for those who are interested. Now, before we plug anything in, we have to install the operating system on the micro SD card. To do that, we're going to head over to raspberrypi.com/software and download the Raspberry Pi imager. Go ahead and install the software, and when it's all finished, launch the program. This is the Raspberry Pi imager software. It's what we're going to use to write the operating system to our SD card. We just have to worry about these first 3 steps. The first step is selecting your device. In my case, I have the Raspberry Pi 5, so I'm going to select that now and select Next. If you have the 4 or the 3, you'll select that here and click Next. This is where you select the operating system that you want to install in your Raspberry Pi. Unless you have a specific project or reason that requires you to change this, I would just use the recommended version, which is the Raspberry Pi OS 64-bit. So I'll select that here and click Next. In this step, you'll select your SD card to write to. If you haven't already, go ahead and insert your SD card into your computer. You'll most likely need an adapter like one of these. This should be checked by default, which will exclude your system drives just to make sure you don't accidentally overwrite something important, but still verify that this is your SD card before moving on. Go ahead and select it and click Next. Now we've reached the customization step. Since we chose option 1, like a typical computer, we're going to go down here and click Skip Customization. All of these settings can be configured during the first boot if you have a mouse and keyboard. If you wanted to do the second option, Headless Mode, this is where you would configure that. However, I'll mention this again at the end for the Headless Mode mention. For now, we're going to click Skip Customization, and now we'll be ready to write our SD card. Verify that your choices are correct, and then click Write. Once this warning is done, click I understand, erase, and write. Now it will write the operating system to the SD card. This process might take a few minutes. While we're waiting, I just want to make a quick note about the micro SD card. I would get one that's at least 32 gigabytes, class 10 or better, because if you go cheap here, you may experience boot issues or other various issues that can sometimes be difficult to track down. Once this process is finished, it's time to start plugging stuff in. The micro SD card can now be inserted into the bottom of the Raspberry Pi. Now we can plug everything else in. We'll go ahead and plug in the mouse and keyboard and follow that up by the HDMI cable and then the power cord. And just a quick note, both the previous and the current model both require an HDMI to micro HDMI adapter, which looks like this. After a few seconds, the LED light should start blinking green. Then you should have some activity on your monitor. This may take a few moments, but once it finally loads, you should end up on a screen that looks something like this. I'm going to zoom in a bit so you can see better, and then we're going to walk through this step by step. So let's get started. Go ahead and click Next on this first screen. Here, we're going to set our country and our time zone. So I'm going to pick the United States. I'm going to click Eastern Time Zone. And if these apply to you, you can check them now. I'm going to use the English language, and I'm going to use the US keyboard, and then I'm going to click Next. Once that finishes setting your location, we're now ready to create your user account. Here you'll enter whatever credentials you want to use for your user account. But for my example, I'm going to use my name, Luke, and then I'm going to enter a password. Confirm your password, and then click Next. Go ahead, select your specific Wi-Fi network, and then click Next. Enter the password for your Wi-Fi, and hit Next. After it connects to Wi-Fi, it'll ask you which browser you want to use. This choice is totally up to you. Select the browser you want, and click Next. You'll then be presented with an option to check for updates. I recommend you do this now. This may take just a few minutes depending on your internet connection. But I'm going to speed things up a little bit. Once everything finishes, we're finally ready to launch our desktop. So go ahead and click Launch. So let's head back to the monitor and take a look. Alright, we finally made it to the desktop of our Raspberry Pi. So for those of you who have used Windows, you'll notice that unlike Windows, the taskbar on the Raspberry Pi is located at the top. So up here on the left, we have our program menu, and then we have our web browser, the file manager, the terminal, and over here on the right, we have all of our taskbar items just like you'd expect. Now, a large part of programming and playing with the Raspberry Pi happens in this terminal. So we're going to jump right in, and I'm going to give you your first command. And all this is going to do is check for any security patches and update our system. No big deal, right? So we're going to type sudo apt update and sudo apt full upgrade -y, and then you'll hit enter. Since we checked for and applied updates during the setup, this should only take a second. Alright, if you made it this far, congratulations. And if this is your first time ever setting up a Raspberry Pi, you should be proud of yourself. We now have a base starting point to build on for future videos in this series, and a place to fall back to if you ever have any issues and need to start over. Lastly, as promised, here's a bit of info on Headless Mode. The most beginner-friendly way to remote connect is through the Raspberry Pi Connect service. This allows you to access your Raspberry Pi via any browser. So here's briefly how that works. If you followed along with this video and you're at the desktop, you can enable remote access by going to the taskbar and turning on Raspberry Pi Connect. You'll then be prompted to sign in with your Raspberry Pi ID. If you don't have one, you can create one now for free. Once you've created your account, go ahead and enter your email and password and sign in. It'll then ask you to name your device. You can call it whatever you like. Once you've added your device, you can click here on View All Devices. And now at this dashboard, you should see the device you just added. It should say online, and you should be given the option to connect here. However, since we're on the browser of the Raspberry Pi, this isn't really useful. If I go to my desktop and go to my browser and log in with the same account here, you'll see the same dashboard with the device right here. And now, if I connect via screen sharing, now we have access remotely to our Raspberry Pi through the browser. And this works in just about any browser. Now, if you wanted to set up a Raspberry Pi to boot straight into headless mode so you don't have to connect a monitor, keyboard, or mouse, you can do that here in the customization step of the Raspberry Pi imager that we skipped earlier. So let's do that now. First, it wants us to enter a host name. This is the host name that appears at the network level. I believe the default is Raspberry Pi, but I'm going to change mine to Restless Gears. Then I'll click Next. For the localization step, go ahead and fill out your capital city, time zone, and keyboard layout, and then click Next. Here's where we'll go ahead and create our account for the Raspberry Pi. So just like I did earlier, I'll call mine Luke, and I'll enter a password. And then hit Next. Here's where you enter your Wi-Fi details, that way your Raspberry Pi knows how to connect whenever it turns on. So under SSID, enter your network name, and then the password for your Wi-Fi as well. Once completed, click Next. SSH is the way we've had to remote into devices for a long time. Raspberry Pi Connect is new, but more beginner friendly. So while you're in here, go ahead and enable SSH and leave it as password authentication. This allows you on your own time to learn about SSH and just use the password for the account you just created here under User to log in. So we'll go ahead and click Next, and then this is the important part that we're looking for, similar to how we just logged in on the desktop. We're going to enable Raspberry Pi Connect here under the customization. So I'll enable that, and then you'll click Open Raspberry Pi Connect. And this is where we'll sign in again with our Raspberry Pi ID. I'll go ahead and sign in with the one I created earlier, and then here we have the option to generate a key and add it to our account, which we will do here. Once you've generated the token, back in the Raspberry Pi imager, your token should appear here under the authentication token. If everything was successful, you can click Next, and just like before, we're ready to write our image to the SD card. Here's a summary of our choices, and then here we have the extra customizations we just applied. If everything looks good, you can click Write. And once the write completes, it'll have applied your customizations, and now you can eject the card and insert it in your Raspberry Pi, just like before. And now, the major difference is the only thing we plug in is the power cord. And from there, we've already configured it to automatically connect to Wi-Fi and for remote access. And now you can use a browser on your laptop or desktop and log into the Raspberry Pi Connect service, and on the dashboard, your device should automatically appear here once it connects to the internet. During the first boot, the Raspberry Pi has to expand the file system, so once it's done with that, it will connect to the internet, and then it will appear here after a few minutes. And then you can screen share here in the browser, just like before. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful to any new Pi owners out there. I'll be right here next week with the next video in this series. We have a little bit more setup to do before we get to the fun stuff, but it'll make maintaining the fun stuff that much easier later. So if that's something that interests you, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you soon.